The Galactic Empire was an unparalleled force in the galaxy, a giant that overshadowed every other civilization in both military strength and technological superiority. For centuries, their massive fleets had dominated space, crushing resistance, subjugating planets, and expanding their reach to the furthest corners of known space. Their ships, vast in scale and armed with advanced weaponry, embodied the power of the Empire. The Empire's fleet was a symbol of fear, and every species in the galaxy knew better than to challenge them. Their enormous armadas patrolled the stars, ensuring that no rebellion, no uprising, and certainly no small insignificant species could ever pose a serious threat. To the Empire, humans were just such a species primitive, chaotic, and lacking the advanced technology that made the Empire supreme. Humanity had carved out a small existence on the fringes of the galaxy, largely ignored by the Empire's grand designs. There had been no need to waste resources conquering such a backward race. The Galactic Empire had far more pressing concerns, and humans were simply beneath notice. However, scattered rumors began to surface. Strange reports from the outer edges of Imperial space suggested that a human fleet had been spotted lurking in systems that the Empire controlled. Ships had been lost, but no one knew how or why. These stories were quickly dismissed by Imperial officials as baseless whispers. The idea that humans could organize a fleet capable of challenging the Empire was laughable. But the whispers persisted. Ships belonging to smaller factions had reportedly been attacked by an unknown force, only to vanish before identifying their attackers. Imperial scouts stationed on the far edges of the galaxy began to send back vague warnings about a fleet that moved without a trace, striking swiftly and disappearing like a ghost. No one had seen these ships up close, but the damage they left behind was real. The Empire, however, remained unconcerned. After all, it was inconceivable that a human fleet could pose any real danger. Humans were barely capable of space travel, let alone military coordination. These so-called attacks were likely nothing more than random acts of piracy or small-scale skirmishes between local factions. Still, the rumors became persistent enough that the Empire decided to investigate. A small reconnaissance mission was dispatched to a seemingly unremarkable system on the fringes of Imperial space, an area where several of these mysterious attacks had reportedly taken place. Confident in its supremacy, the Empire sent a few scout ships to the region, expecting to easily locate and eliminate whatever nuisance had dared to disrupt their dominance. The mission was routine, and the scouts approached the system with the arrogance that came with being part of the most powerful military force in the galaxy. As they entered the system, everything appeared calm. The sensors on the Imperial scout ships registered no immediate threats, no signs of enemy ships, no activity at all. It was as if the system was empty, devoid of life or movement. The Imperial commanders were unfazed. They had expected as much. After all, these humans were not a real military force. The scout ships began their standard sweep of the area, scanning for any signs of the rumored human fleet. The commanders were certain that whatever threat had been reported was nothing more than a minor annoyance, a problem to be swiftly dealt with. Then, without warning, it happened. The first strike was so fast and so precise that the Imperial scouts didn't even realize they were under attack until it was too late. Out of the empty space, ships appeared, human ships. They didn't resemble anything the Empire had expected. Smaller than Imperial vessels but sleek and fast, these ships moved with an agility that the Empire's hulking battleships could never match. They appeared as if from nowhere, surrounding the scout ships in an instant. The human fleet, if it could even be called that, attacked with a level of precision that left the Imperial ships paralyzed. Laser fire erupted from the human ships, cutting through the Empire's defenses before they could mount a response. The scout ships, designed for reconnaissance and not full-scale combat, were caught off guard. Their shields flickered as the human ships darted in and out of firing range, striking with brutal efficiency. Within minutes, the Empire's ships were crippled, their communications jammed, their systems disabled. It was a massacre, and the Imperial commanders had no explanation for how it had happened so quickly. The human ships didn't linger. Just as quickly as they had appeared, they vanished, disappearing into the void of space, leaving nothing behind but the wreckage of Imperial vessels and the stunned survivors. The few who managed to escape reported back to the Empire with tales of a fleet that moved like shadows, striking from nowhere and disappearing just as swiftly. The survivors spoke of ships that seemed to blend into the very fabric of space, evading detection and overwhelming Imperial forces with a combination of speed and precision. The Empire was left in shock. This wasn't the disorganized, primitive human fleet they had expected. This was something else entirely. These humans had mastered a form of combat that the Empire had never encountered before: stealth, precision, and guerrilla tactics that rendered the Empire's superior firepower useless. The Imperial commanders couldn't believe what had happened. They had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and outclassed by a fleet they didn't even think existed. The reports that came back to the Empire were met with disbelief and confusion. How could this happen? How could a species as insignificant as humans pose such a threat? The Empire had built its military strategy on overwhelming its enemies with sheer force, on crushing opposition with massive fleets and advanced technology. But this human fleet didn't play by the same rules. They didn't engage in direct combat, they didn't fight the way the Empire's enemies usually did. Instead, they used speed, stealth, and precision to strike at the Empire's weak points, exploiting every vulnerability. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Empire found itself facing an enemy it didn't understand. The human fleet, or the Phantom Armada as it was now being called, had defied every expectation. They had attacked with brutal efficiency, crippled the Empire's scouts, and disappeared without a trace. The Empire, which had once dismissed humans as irrelevant, now realized they were dealing with a force far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. The first encounter with the Phantom Fleet was only the beginning, and the Empire was about to learn that they were no longer the sole masters of the galaxy. The humans had found a way to fight back, and they had done so in a way that left the Empire terrified. The human fleet had proven to be unlike any adversary the Empire had ever faced. While the Imperial fleets boasted overwhelming numbers, size, and firepower, the human ships operated on entirely different principles. Their tactics were based on stealth and speed, taking full advantage of their smaller, more agile ships to strike quickly and disappear before the Empire could even begin to respond. Every attack left the Empire scrambling to understand how their vast networks of surveillance and patrols had failed to detect the human fleet's movements. The humans didn't engage in prolonged battles. They struck where the Empire was weakest: supply lines, communication outposts, and isolated scouting ships. Their attacks came without warning, sometimes in the dead of space or deep within asteroid fields where Imperial ships rarely ventured. The moment the Empire moved to retaliate, the human ships were gone, retreating into the vastness of space where even the Empire's most advanced tracking systems couldn't find them. The Empire's fleets, built for direct confrontations, lumbered through space, always a step behind. To make matters worse, the human ships were deceptive in appearance. They seemed outdated, smaller, and technologically inferior, but they were equipped with unconventional and devastating weaponry. They fired strange, unpredictable munitions, guided plasma bursts, EMP strikes that disabled Imperial shields, and precision weapons that could punch through the thickest armor. What seemed like insignificant human ships had become surgical instruments, slicing through Imperial defenses with terrifying efficiency. Every engagement ended with the same result: a quick strike, devastating damage, and the human fleet vanishing before the Empire could bring its full might to bear. It wasn't just the physical damage that left the Empire reeling, it was the psychological toll. After the first few attacks, Imperial forces began to experience something they hadn't felt in centuries: fear. The human fleet didn't just strike at military targets, they played with the minds of their enemies. Cryptic warnings began to appear on Imperial communication channels before each attack, messages written in human languages, but clearly meant for their enemies. These messages were taunts, threats, or sometimes just eerie silence. "We see you," one transmission had read moments before a supply convoy was ambushed. Another had simply stated, "Nowhere is safe," followed by an attack on an outpost thought to be impenetrable. Imperial commanders, used to facing enemies head-on, didn't know how to deal with this new form of psychological warfare. They were used to instilling fear in others, not having it used against them. Human attacks were so precise, so methodical, that it seemed as if they knew the Empire's every move before it happened. Imperial fleets would be dispatched to hunt down the human ships, only to arrive in systems that appeared completely empty. Hours or days later, those same fleets would receive reports of human strikes in other sectors, always just out of reach. The human fleet left behind no physical trace, no debris fields, no engine signatures, no communications to intercept. It was as if they were ghosts, appearing and disappearing at will. For the first time, the Empire's vast intelligence network, designed to monitor every corner of the galaxy, was failing. The humans had mastered the art of remaining invisible, striking with an almost supernatural precision. This only fueled the growing fear within the Empire. Commanders began to second-guess every move, paranoid that the humans were watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Imperial fleets became restless. They were used to overwhelming their enemies, to showing up in force and crushing any resistance through sheer firepower. But this enemy was elusive, uncatchable. Fleet commanders were on edge, knowing that every hyperspace jump could land them in the middle of an ambush, or worse, in an empty sector with nothing to show for their efforts. Morale began to dip, and rumors spread through the lower ranks about the human fleet's ability to strike anywhere, at any time. Soldiers whispered of a phantom armada that couldn't be tracked, ships that could slip through the Empire's defenses undetected. Then came the attack on the Imperial outpost, a strike that would forever change the Empire's view of the human fleet. Located on the edge of Imperial space, this outpost was a critical hub for supply routes and communications. It was heavily fortified, armed with some of the most advanced defensive systems in the galaxy. The Empire, confident in its superiority, had stationed a modest fleet nearby, believing that no force in this remote region could possibly challenge their dominance. To the Empire's leadership, the idea that humans could pose a threat to such a vital installation was laughable. But the humans had been watching. The attack came without warning, in the dead of night cycle, when the outpost's defenses were at their most vulnerable. The humans didn't approach with the overwhelming force the Empire had expected. Instead, a handful of ships emerged from the cover of a nearby nebula, their sensors masked by the surrounding radiation. By the time the outpost's defensive systems detected them, it was too late. The human ships unleashed a barrage of targeted strikes, focused, precise, and devastating. In a matter of minutes, the outpost's shields were down, and its communication relays were severed. The Imperial fleet stationed just beyond the system received garbled distress calls but couldn't respond in time. The human fleet moved with terrifying efficiency, disabling key systems and neutralizing any attempt to retaliate. What made the attack truly horrifying for the Empire was the precision. The humans weren't interested in causing widespread destruction. They were dismantling the outpost piece by piece, crippling its ability to function. When the Imperial fleet finally arrived, the human ships were gone. What remained was a scene of total devastation. The outpost's defenses were in ruins, its systems offline, and its command structure in disarray. The few survivors spoke of how the humans had moved like ghosts, how they had known exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. There were no debris fields, no wreckage from human ships to study. The humans had come, destroyed the outpost, and vanished, leaving the Empire to pick up the pieces. This attack marked a turning point for the Empire. The human fleet was no longer just a rumor or a nuisance on the fringes of their territory. It was a legitimate threat, capable of crippling key installations and outmaneuvering the Empire's forces. The realization sent shockwaves through the Imperial ranks. For centuries, the Empire had been unchallenged, its fleets the ultimate symbol of power and control. But now, that power was being undermined by an enemy that refused to fight by the Empire's rules. The human fleet had done more than destroy an outpost. It had instilled fear into the heart of the Empire, a fear that was growing with every attack, every mysterious disappearance. The Empire had always believed itself invincible, but now, with the threat of the Phantom Armada lurking in the shadows, they were beginning to realize they were up against an enemy they didn't understand, a fleet that struck without warning, left no trace, and thrived on turning fear into its greatest weapon. The Empire, facing the phantom threat of the human fleet, decided to take decisive action. No longer dismissing the humans as a minor nuisance, they launched multiple counterattacks, mobilizing entire fleets to hunt down and destroy this mysterious enemy. Imperial commanders, veterans of countless campaigns, were confident that with their overwhelming firepower and advanced technology, they could easily corner and crush the human ships. Orders were sent across the outer sectors to trap the human fleet, using the full might of the Empire's vast armadas to surround them. However, no matter how carefully they planned, every counterattack ended in the same infuriating failure. The Empire would send a massive fleet to a sector where they believed the human ships were operating, only to find nothing. Their long-range sensors, designed to detect even the faintest trace of enemy movement, would pick up no signals. Entire star systems were scoured, but the humans were nowhere to be found. Hours or days later, reports would come in from another sector, far from where the Imperial fleet had been deployed, of yet another human strike just as precise and devastating as the last. It was as if the humans could anticipate every move the Empire made. The Empire's fleets, built for direct confrontations and massive engagements, were always a step behind. By the time they arrived, the humans had already vanished. Frustration grew within the Imperial ranks. How could this ragtag human fleet, with its supposedly inferior technology, outmaneuver the most powerful military force in the galaxy? Imperial commanders were left baffled and enraged, unable to comprehend how their overwhelming firepower was being rendered useless. Each time the Empire attempted to corner the Phantom fleet, the humans would slip away without a trace, only to strike somewhere else, keeping the Imperial forces constantly on edge. The Empire's typical strategy of overwhelming their enemies with sheer numbers proved ineffective. The human fleet refused to engage in prolonged battles. Instead, they struck with surgical precision, dismantling key targets before disappearing into the darkness of space. The Empire's brute force was useless against an enemy that fought with speed, agility, and an uncanny ability to vanish before a decisive blow could be dealt. The humans didn't fight the way the Empire expected. They didn't meet them on open battlefields or space lanes where the Empire's massive dreadnoughts and carriers could unleash their full destructive power. Instead, the humans used the natural terrain of space to their advantage. They moved through asteroid fields, hiding their ships among the massive chunks of rock that interfered with Imperial sensors. They disappeared into the dense energy fields of nebulas, where even the Empire's most advanced AI-guided tracking systems struggled to get a lock. They would lie in wait behind moons or on the far side of planetary rings, always using the environment to mask their movements. This unconventional use of space confounded the Empire. They were used to fighting enemies that played by their rules, engaging head-on with superior firepower. But the humans turned every strength of the Empire into a weakness. The sheer size and firepower of the Imperial fleet became a liability in asteroid belts and nebulas, where large ships couldn't maneuver as effectively. The humans used the terrain as a weapon, blending into the environment until they were ready to strike. And when they did strike, it was with brutal efficiency. Every attack was calculated, targeting critical points that would inflict maximum damage. The humans knew they couldn't match the Empire ship for ship, so they focused on precision strikes that disrupted the Empire's ability to respond. They targeted supply lines, cutting off vital resources from reaching the front lines. They hit communication relays, severing the Empire's ability to coordinate its fleets across vast distances. They attacked isolated Imperial outposts, crippling the Empire's ability to maintain control over key sectors. What terrified the Empire most wasn't the scale of the attacks, it was the precision. The humans didn't waste resources. Every strike was carefully planned, every target chosen to destabilize the Empire's operations. Unlike the Empire, which often used overwhelming firepower to crush its enemies, the human fleet fought with ruthless efficiency. They inflicted maximum damage while minimizing their own losses. Their ships were small, fast, and hard to hit, and they knew exactly when to retreat, disappearing into the void before the Empire could mount a proper defense. The humans were relentless. As the Empire struggled to counter the Phantom fleet, the frequency of human attacks increased. Imperial commanders found themselves constantly reacting to new strikes, never able to predict where the humans would appear next. The Empire was used to being the aggressor, but now they were being forced onto the defensive. Every time they mobilized a fleet to respond to an attack, the humans had already moved on, striking somewhere else. The Empire's fleets, built for large-scale battles, were too slow to respond to the humans' hit-and-run tactics. The humans' ability to target key supply routes and communication hubs began to take a toll. Imperial ships, once perfectly maintained and stocked with endless resources, began to feel the strain of the constant disruptions. Supplies became harder to come by, and communication between fleets grew more difficult. The Empire's war machine, once so efficient and unstoppable, was slowly being ground down by an enemy they couldn't even see. The Empire, which had always prided itself on its ability to maintain order and control, was now losing its grip, and the humans were just getting started. The relentless nature of the human attacks began to spread panic among the Empire's forces. Imperial commanders were left in a constant state of uncertainty, unsure of where the next attack would come from. The humans had proven themselves masters of guerrilla warfare, exploiting every weakness in the Empire's vast but unwieldy military. Even the Empire's most experienced tacticians were at a loss. They had never faced an enemy that refused to engage on traditional terms, an enemy that could strike and disappear without a trace. Every time the Empire attempted to launch a counterattack, they were met with the same frustration. The humans had mastered the art of avoiding direct confrontation, using the natural terrain of space to their advantage and striking with precision when the Empire least expected it. The Imperial fleet, once the most feared force in the galaxy, was now being humiliated by a smaller, nimbler adversary that fought with a level of cunning and efficiency the Empire had never encountered before. The Empire had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. What had once been a nuisance on the fringes of their territory had become a full-blown crisis, one that threatened to undermine the very foundation of the Empire's power. The Phantom fleet was no longer a myth, it was a living nightmare, and the Empire was powerless to stop it. Every failed counterattack, every failed attempt to trap the human fleet, only deepened the growing sense of desperation within the Empire. The realization dawned slowly, but with a growing sense of dread, the Empire began to understand the true nature of the human fleet they were up against. These weren't disorganized rebels or pirates striking at random targets, no. This was something far more dangerous. A disciplined, coordinated military force that had mastered the art of warfare in ways the Empire had never imagined. The humans weren't just relying on brute strength or the latest technology. They were using every aspect of psychological and guerrilla warfare to its full potential, turning the Empire's own might against them. The humans had adapted to the realities of fighting an overwhelmingly superior enemy. They knew they couldn't match the Empire ship for ship, so they never tried. Instead, they focused on precision strikes, hit-and-run tactics, and manipulating the vastness of space to their advantage. Every Imperial-strength massive fleets, advanced weaponry, and logistical dominance had been rendered ineffective. The humans had learned to exploit the Empire's weaknesses, from their reliance on predictable tactics to their need for overwhelming firepower. By refusing to engage in conventional warfare, the humans had turned the rules of combat upside down, leaving the Empire's commanders struggling to respond. The most unsettling part for the Empire was the humans' ability to blend into the shadows. They never struck where they were expected to, they never fought in a way that could be anticipated. And worst of all, they never stayed long enough for the Empire to retaliate. It was as if the humans understood every step of the Empire's war machine, preempting their moves and leaving the Imperial forces chasing shadows. The humans had perfected the art of stealth and deception, making it impossible for the Empire to track or predict their actions. As the Empire's leaders came to terms with this new reality, panic began to spread among their forces. Stories of the Phantom Fleet circulated like wildfire, sowing fear and uncertainty. Imperial commanders, once so sure of their superiority, now hesitated before venturing into human-occupied sectors. Rumors spread that the human ships could appear anywhere, at any time, and that no fleet, no matter how large or powerful, was safe from their strikes. Every time an Imperial fleet prepared to move, there was a lingering fear that they would be walking into a trap. This fear wasn't just limited to the battlefield, it reached deep into the command structure of the Empire itself. The confidence that had once been the hallmark of Imperial leadership was beginning to crumble. Morale plummeted as fleet after fleet returned from their missions empty-handed, unable to even catch a glimpse of the elusive human ships. For the first time in centuries, the Empire found itself paralyzed by an enemy it could neither see nor understand. It wasn't just the human fleet's military capabilities that terrified the Empire, it was their unpredictability, their ability to turn invisible, strike, and disappear before the Empire could react. The Empire had built its dominance on fear. For generations, they had crushed all opposition through sheer force, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. But now, they were the ones living in fear. Every Imperial mission into human-occupied space was haunted by the possibility of an unseen enemy lurking in the shadows. Commanders began to doubt their orders, unsure whether the reports of human activity were real or just a ploy to lure them into another ambush. The uncertainty gnawed at the Empire's forces, creating a sense of helplessness that was impossible to shake. As the fear grew, so did the whispers of defeat. Imperial commanders, once so proud of their unassailable power, now began to question whether the human fleet could even be stopped. The humans had proven time and again that they didn't need massive fleets or advanced technology to win. They just needed patience, precision, and a willingness to exploit the Empire's every mistake. With every failed counterattack, with every supply line severed and every communication relay destroyed, the Empire's hold on its outer territories weakened. The final blow came when the Empire was forced to retreat from the fringes of their territory. Entire sectors were ceded to the humans without a fight. Imperial fleets, once sent out to crush the human threat, were now being recalled, their commanders unwilling to risk another encounter with the Phantom Armada. The Empire's vast borders, once thought to be impenetrable, were now shrinking as the humans slowly took control of key sectors, cutting off the Empire's influence bit by bit. This retreat was unthinkable for the Empire, a regime that had never known defeat on such a scale. For the first time in their history, they were not the ones dictating the terms of battle. They were being forced to pull back, not because of the strength of the human fleet, but because of their inability to comprehend or predict human tactics. The humans weren't fighting the war the way the Empire wanted. They were fighting it on their own terms, and the Empire had no answer for that. The realization that the humans had changed the rules of warfare forever was a bitter pill for the Empire to swallow. They had spent centuries mastering the art of overwhelming their enemies with superior numbers and technology. But none of that mattered now. The human fleet had shown the Empire that there was another way to fight, a way that didn't rely on brute force or advanced weaponry, but on cunning, patience, and the ability to think several steps ahead. As the Empire retreated, the human fleet continued to grow in power and influence. What had once been a distant rumor, a small, insignificant force on the fringes of the galaxy, had now become the Empire's greatest threat. The Phantom Fleet was no longer a mystery to be solved, it was a reality that the Empire had to live with. With every day that passed, the humans grew bolder, their strikes more frequent and devastating. The Empire, once so certain of its superiority, was now struggling to maintain control over its own territories. In the end, the Empire realized that their greatest fear wasn't the size or strength of the human fleet. It wasn't even the damage the humans had inflicted on their ships or their infrastructure. Their greatest fear was that they couldn't understand the humans' tactics, they couldn't predict their moves, they couldn't track their ships, and they couldn't stop them from striking again and again. The humans had mastered a form of warfare that the Empire was ill-equipped to handle, and that realization was far more terrifying than any fleet of battleships. The Phantom Fleet had become a symbol of everything the Empire couldn't control. It represented a new kind of warfare, one that didn't rely on brute strength or overwhelming force, but on precision, stealth, and psychological dominance. The humans had turned every Imperial strength into a weakness, and the Empire was left reeling, unsure of how to respond. In the end, the Empire's greatest fear had come true. They were no longer the masters of the galaxy. The humans had proven that sometimes the deadliest force isn't the one you can see, it's the one you never even know is there.